Hello, my friend. The underworld has always existed alongside society, operating under brutal rules that outsiders can never fully understand. Crime bosses are not just cold-blooded killers. They are masterminds who manipulate both the economy and politics. Some hide behind the facade of successful businessmen, while others rule through sheer violence and firepower. But no matter the path they take, their fate usually comes down to just two options: prison or death. Today we're going to talk about one of the most notorious crime lords in the history of Shanxi, China, Shanxi Mao. He wasn't just the leader of the longest-running gang in Shanxi. He was also a master at recruiting ex-convicts and ruthless outlaws to build an unshakable criminal empire. His gang operated as an organized crime syndicate, specializing in extortion, random assaults, intentional injuries, and illegal detentions. They terrorized ordinary people, ran illegal casinos, and organized large-scale gambling operations, raking in illicit profits of over 10 billion yuan. Shanxi Mao first emerged on the criminal scene in the 1980s. Many of the crime bosses we've discussed in previous episodes were active during the same era. However, in 2001, during a government crackdown on organized crime, most of those gang leaders were completely wiped out. Yet somehow, Shanxi Mao managed to survive until 2018, when his empire was finally dismantled. For nearly 30 years, he roamed free, repeatedly imprisoned but never fully taken down. The most shocking part? Even while serving his sentences, he lived in private prison cells equipped with a refrigerator, a computer, and a special diet fit for a king. He was granted sentence reductions multiple times, and every time he was released, his power and influence only grew stronger. Upon his release, he was welcomed by over 400 gang members, parading in a fleet of luxury cars, including Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, flaunting his dominance like a monarch returning to his throne. So, how did Shanxi Mao manage to run rampant for so long? What horrifying crimes did he commit? Shanxi Mao's real name was Ren Aijun, but few people ever used it. In the underworld, he was infamous by his nickname, a name synonymous with violence and crime. Born in 1967, the fourth child. In his family, he grew up in Taiyuan, though his ancestral roots were in Lin County, Shanxi Province. He had no interest in school, his academic performance was poor, and his family struggled financially. To help out, he left school after middle school and jumped straight into the workforce. But being young and inexperienced, the money he made was barely enough to get by. By the mid to late 1980s, entertainment venues such as nightclubs and arcades began popping up across Taiwan. While working different jobs, Shanxi Mao crossed paths with many shady characters, men who lived lavish, powerful, and ruthless lives. He often saw gangsters entering nightclubs with entourages, spending money recklessly, drinking and partying without a care. Envy and ambition burned within him. He longed for that lifestyle, and that desire led him straight into the underworld. At first, he was just a low-level thug, a small fry guarding nightclubs and arcades, participating in street fights. He was willing to do the dirtiest jobs, from harassing women to broad daylight robberies. But he soon realized that, in the criminal world, respect came from brutality. To gain power and avoid being bullied himself, he had to be ruthless. He had to strike first in every fight, making sure his opponent was left crippled in fear. He understood that if he waited to be attacked before reacting, he would never earn the respect he craved. With this mindset, Shanxi Mao transformed into a cold, emotionless predator. He began carrying a knife wherever he went, ready to stab anyone who crossed him. He never hesitated in a fight, always making the first move, swift, vicious, and calculated. The more battles he won, the more feared he became. People started whispering that he was untouchable, that crossing him was as good as signing your own death warrant. But as the saying goes, you can only outrun fate for so long. Eventually, the law caught up with him. In 1994, the Taiyuan Intermediate People's Court sentenced him to 10 years in prison for serious crimes, including hooliganism, robbery, and organized assaults. However, after appealing his sentence, the Shanxi Higher People's Court reduced it to just 6 years. This was his first time in prison, but something strange happened. Despite the 6-year sentence, he barely served 2 years. Due to certain inconvenient circumstances, he was bailed out after just 1 year and later received another sentence reduction of 2 years and 2 months. By September 1996, he was officially released. In reality, he had spent just a little over 2 years behind bars, but instead of turning over a new leaf, Xiao Simao's ambitions only grew stronger. He no longer wanted to be anyone's subordinate. He wanted to build his own empire. To do that, he needed money to support his gang. And to get money, he followed the strategy of black devouring black, taking over the territories of other crime bosses. In a short time, he solidified his place in the criminal underworld. He established his own gambling dens, taking a cut from every gambler's winnings and running a lucrative loan sharking business. One of the most terrifying incidents tied to Xiao Simao happened in 1997. A man named Li had borrowed money from his gambling operation but failed to repay it on time. To make matters worse, Li continued gambling, accumulating even more debt. This enraged Xiao Simao. He ordered his men to kidnap Li and brutally beat him with an iron hammer. By the time they were done, Li's body was a mangled mess, blood and flesh scattered across the room. His family had to scrape together every cent they could borrow just to buy his release, and that was just one of countless horrifying crimes committed by Xiao Simao. There are many more stories, each one more gruesome than the last. Xiao Simao relentlessly expanded his power and solidified his position through brutal means. To increase his influence, he orchestrated a series of extortion schemes, targeting wealthy business owners in the region. His victims lived in constant fear, knowing that anyone who dared to resist would face relentless retaliation. Fearing his ruthless vengeance, most had no choice but to comply, some even pushing themselves to financial ruin just to buy a fleeting sense of peace. As Xiao Simao's power grew, his gang became even more reckless and bloodthirsty. They didn't just extort, kidnap, and threaten innocent civilians, they also carried out violent purges against rival gangs, expanding their territory and seizing lucrative operations. But he wasn't content with just ruling the underworld in his province. He took bold steps to further cement his power, going so far as to spend a fortune on weapons smuggled from Myanmar. Gradually, he became one of the most feared crime lords, rivaling notorious figures in Shanxi province like Lin Erwei and Chao Sanpang. At the time, there was a saying on the streets, Yi Ding, Erwei, Sanpang, Simao, Wu Guai, Liu Monk, and Man Gang. While Xiao Simao wasn't as influential or well-funded as Li Manlin, when it came to sheer ruthlessness, he was second to none. But in the criminal world, there's always a price to pay. In 2001, during a nationwide crackdown on organized crime, Xiao Simao and several other crime lords were arrested. Unlike most of them, who were sentenced to death, he was only given a life sentence, leaving him a chance to continue his reign of terror. In 2003, he was officially sentenced to life imprisonment on 7 charges, including organizing and leading a criminal syndicate. Yet, even behind bars, he showed no remorse. Instead, he maintained his influence, manipulating the prison's internal power structure and controlling other inmates. Xiao Simao wasn't a prisoner who followed the rules. He thrived in prison, treating it as just another battleground for power and wealth. On August 19, 2005, at around 9 p.m., inmate Wang Mo was on duty in the detention area when another inmate, Jai Mo Hong, returned from Xiao Simao's cell after a drinking session. Drunk and arrogant, Jai began shouting and attacking other prisoners. Seeing the situation spiral out of control, Wang intervened and dragged Jai back to his cell. But as soon as he was locked in, Jai started another brawl with a fellow inmate, ending up severely beaten and hospitalized. When Xiao Simao heard that his underling had been assaulted, he immediately blamed Wang, the officer on duty that night. Furious, he ordered his men to beat Wang mercilessly. Humiliated and broken, Wang couldn't bear the disgrace and attempted to set himself on fire. Though he survived, he suffered burns over 90% of his body. Yet despite the severity of the incident, Xiao Simao faced no real consequences. He was merely transferred to another prison. His power within the prison system remained intact, shielding him from any real punishment. Inside prison, Shanxi lived like a king. He had a private cell, personal servants, and access to alcohol and lavish meals. Shockingly, he was even able to arrange for beautiful women to stay overnight in his cell without repercussions. Despite never engaging in labor, he consistently received top marks for his reform progress, a privilege few inmates enjoyed. Shanxi knew exactly how to exploit legal loopholes to shorten his sentence. Though prison regulations required sentence reductions to be based on merit, his record was full of disciplinary violations, including fights, weapon possession, and even insulting prison guards. Everyone knew of his misconduct, yet it never hindered his sentence reductions. To avoid public scrutiny, prison officials used a cunning strategy. They constantly transferred him between prisons. Each time he was due for a sentence reduction, the previous prison would quietly prepare the paperwork, while the new prison would formally submit the request. This method allowed him to secure 4 standard sentence reductions and 2 special ones for major contributions, though in reality, those contributions often had nothing to do with him. He cleverly took credit for old cases reported by other inmates, manipulating the records to claim their merits as his own. As a result, his life sentence was effectively cut down to just 10 years and 2 months. By June 2013, he was a free man. On June 28, 2013, Shanxi walked out of prison to a scene fit for a king. Hundreds of luxury cars, Rolls-Royces, Bentleys lined up to greet him. 400 to 500 underlings from the underworld stood waiting. Firecrackers roared for over an hour, announcing the return of a crime lord. But instead of reforming, he became even more ruthless and ambitious. Arrogantly, he declared, "I will flatten Shanxi. I alone will reign supreme." Upon his release, he wasted no time resuming his criminal empire. But this time, he had learned from past mistakes. Where he had once been reckless and flashy, he now adopted a new strategy. Work arrogantly, live discreetly. He no longer engaged in violent turf wars himself, but ruled from behind the scenes, using his influence to control everything. His operations expanded from robbery, drug trafficking, and forced property seizures to dominating the transportation industry. But rather than using brute force, he employed more sophisticated tactics: intimidation, manipulation, and exploiting legal loopholes. His control was no less deadly, only more insidious. Under the guise of a businessman, Shanxi used legitimate companies as fronts for his criminal activities. He invested in businesses at absurdly low prices, using proxies to hold ownership while laundering his reputation on paper. But behind the scenes, he remained a mastermind of crime, disrupting public order, coercing transactions, and orchestrating violent attacks. When he wanted to pressure competitors, he no longer relied on direct violence. Instead, he used soft violence, cutting off their electricity, surrounding their businesses, publicly harassing them, and applying psychological pressure until they submitted. Through these refined yet ruthless methods, Shanxi amassed staggering wealth, all while maintaining the illusion of legitimacy. 3 months after his release from prison, Shanxi's underworld organization was back in full operation. A car parts businessman in Taiwan got into a dispute over the rights to 20 acres of land and turned to Shanxi for help. Though Mao never showed up in person, his men immediately swarmed the rival party's doorstep, harassing them day and night. Their sheer presence, combined with Shanxi's infamous brutality, forced the opposing side to concede to his demands. From then on, he became the go-to fixer for those with money and power. With wealth and influence at his fingertips, Shanxi expanded his reach. He left Taiwan, returned to his hometown, and then set his sights on the lucrative gambling market in Macau. By late 2014, he had set up a casino there, using sophisticated tricks to lure high rollers into financial ruin. In one notable case, a real estate tycoon lost 2 billion yuan in just 2 days, the funds he had set aside for major construction projects. The fallout was devastating. Hundreds of people who had spent their life savings on new homes were left destitute. Their money had vanished, and the promised houses were never built, leaving families in despair. That same year, Shanxi Mao and hundreds of his men stormed a major coal mine to assert their dominance. Armed with clubs and knives, his gang barged into the management offices, forcing the leadership to hand over control of coal transportation. From that moment on, every ton of coal leaving the mine had to go through him, raking in massive profits, with no effort on his part. Seeing how well this worked, he applied the same strategy to an aluminum mine in Fangshan County, where he monopolized transport and drove up prices exponentially, pocketing tens of thousands of yuan daily. But he didn't stop there. Shanxi Mao sought to launder his dirty money by investing in real estate. He partnered with a shell company that claimed to be renovating slum areas, launching a large-scale fraud scheme. Thousands of people were tricked into investing, lured by promises of luxurious new apartments. Yet after raking in billions, the project suddenly froze. Investors had nowhere to turn, and those who dared to demand their money back were met with silence, or worse. 2015, his arrogance knew no bounds. He and his gang brazenly took over a luxurious villa, turning it into their headquarters. They never paid a cent for the property, nor did they bother settling the 100,000 yuan electricity bill that piled up over months. The villa's original owner, a man named Wang, repeatedly tried to collect payment but was met with threats and intimidation from Mao's henchmen. Frustrated, Wang decided to cut off the power supply, believing this would force Shanxi Mao to negotiate. But he underestimated how much of a beast he had provoked. Mao saw this as a direct challenge to his authority, an unforgivable insult. He retaliated immediately, ordering his men to terrorize Wang's family, blocking their door, vandalizing their property, and subjecting them to relentless psychological torment. In the end, overwhelmed by fear, Wang abandoned his home and fled the city, leaving the villa to Mao. Through these ruthless tactics, Shanxi Mao amassed a fortune of over 1 billion yuan in less than 3 years after his release. His office, once night fell, was a spectacle of extravagance. Luxury cars lined up outside, and wild parties raged within. Drug use became commonplace among his associates, creating a scene that shocked even those familiar with the underworld. But just when Shanxi Mao thought he had reached the peak of power, an unexpected betrayal shattered his empire. Despite his cruelty to society, there had been one person who had stood by him: his wife. She had tirelessly worked behind the scenes, bribing officials and pulling strings to secure his sentence reductions. Yet, after his release and return to power, Shanxi Mao spiraled into hedonism. He indulged in alcohol, women, and extravagance, treating his wife as an inconvenience. To him, she had grown old and no longer deserved a place by his side. When she objected to his lifestyle, he grew even more disdainful, shamelessly flaunting his affairs with younger women. The breaking point came when he demanded a divorce. After years of devotion, his wife realized she had been nothing more than a pawn. Hatred consumed her. If he was willing to discard her so heartlessly, she had nothing left to lose. She played her final card, exposing every single one of his crimes to the authorities. What followed was a chain reaction that even Shanxi Mao couldn't control. On February 10, 2018, while enjoying a lavish Lunar New Year getaway at a high-end resort in Hainan, the police stormed in. He had no time to react before he was handcuffed on the spot. His arrest sent shockwaves through the country. On December 30th, 2019, the court sentenced him to life in prison, but he wasn't the only one to fall. His downfall triggered a sweeping crackdown, pulling down the entire network of corrupt officials and underground figures who had shielded him for years. In total, 93 people were convicted, with sentences ranging from 15 years to 2 years and 6 months in prison. And so the life of Shanxi Mao came full circle, from a street thug to a crime lord, only to end up behind bars once again. The man who once boasted he would flatten Shanxi, China, had finally met his reckoning.